Hello my wonderful Coldplay friends! In this video we are going to run a musical analysis of Coloratura and explain why all these cool moments in the song sound so interesting and unique. Personally, I was super shocked when I first heard this song and honestly think it's one of the best products Coldplay has ever made. And given the amount of intention with the writing and theory-based techniques, I just really wanted to make this video because I'm a huge sucker for music theory. Now before we get started, I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel. It seriously helps me out so much and is easy as clicking a button. And I'll be here to talk about everything Coldplay related for years to come, so I promise you won't regret it. So now, without further ado, let's get started. So there were so many moments in this song that were very special and unique, and it's a little difficult to kind of categorize them. So what I'm going to do is run down the entire song, hitting each one of those notable points one at a time. So starting off from the very beginning, we hear what sounds like an orchestra tuning, which is super fitting because the song sounds somewhat like a space symphony. And then eventually everything tunes to a D, which in the global perspective of the song is the key, D major. So it kind of sounds like this. But what I found super interesting was what happens right before the transition into the next section. Very softly in the mid strings, we hear a C natural. Now, what makes this so unique is that in D major, again, the general key of this song, there isn't a C natural. Instead, it's a C sharp. And with C being the 7th note in the D major scale, this is what's referred to as a lowered 7th. Now, this small detail makes a huge statement because given that this is the first thing that we hear in the song, it makes the listener feel like we're actually using mixolydian, which is just a fancy word to describe that we are using the lowered 7th. So it kind of sets the tone for the listener to expect these subtle and sometimes not so subtle variations of the key. Now moving on to the next section, we hear a beautiful piano playing followed by a harp playing arpeggios until it resolves on a D major chord, which feels very solidified, until we hear this. Now this beautiful motif is one of my favorite integral parts of the song, but other than it sounding really pretty, the melody actually suggests something really interesting. You see, it uses the notes E, F sharp, B, G sharp again in the octave, D, and then F sharp. Now in that melody, what is most interesting is that G sharp, since there's not a G sharp in D major or D mixolydian. So what it does is suggest a new mode, the Lydian mode. Now just to give you an example of how each of these sound different, here is the D major scale, D mixolydian, and finally D Lydian. So to me, the Lydian scale, the one I just played, sounds the most striking. It's hard not to notice that something special is going on with this melody. And other than just sounding interesting, it actually sets up this idea of using a major 2 chord, which you'll see later on in the song. So I think that this motif is definitely one of the most important parts of the piece. And now moving on to the next part, the real meat of the song, we hear this progression. Now what this progression does, other than blow my mind, is make use of a chromatic ascending line that goes A sharp, B, and C natural. So let me play the progression again and voice that line in a higher register so you can really hear it. So what makes this unique is that we typically don't see progressions based on a chromatic line like this. And the musical effect that this gives is somewhat mysterious, but also like it's anticipating something. As opposed to a descending chromatic line that goes like this, that gives kind of a somber feel. This ascending line makes you feel a little on edge and really anticipating a resolution. Now, 2 more quick things that happen at the end of this progression is that minor 4, where it goes from G major to G minor, which I'm always just a huge fan of. And then we have this small chromatic ornamentation when we play that D chord. So it goes like this. And I think both of those are implemented really carefully and just super tasteful. And then at the chorus, something pretty wild happens. The progression goes like this. And this part seriously just surprised me in all the right ways. We have that A minor chord, which makes use of this lowered seventh. Now, if you remember from before, that lowered seventh was used at the very beginning when we had the orchestra tuned to D, and then we heard that lowered seventh, that C natural. So not only does this chord sound incredible, but it also gives a nod to an earlier section of the song. And then we hear that A sharp major before going to D. Which, when we go between those chords, it definitely gives this bizarre, almost space-esque vibe. So just so you can hear that for yourself. So you can tell there's something unique about this, right? And that's because the A sharp is really far out of the ordinary when it comes to chords typically seen in D major. But remember, the song likes to stray away from the original key and mess around with different modes, right? And in this case, I would argue that the A sharp makes it feel like we are using the whole tone scale. Now, this is also referred to as the dream sequence, since it's used in musicals, movies, and even important orchestral pieces to emphasize the state of someone being in a dream. And I think that most can agree that while listening to this song, it's really easy to feel like you're in a dream. And then to end things off with the chorus, the progression uses a major 2, which, if you remember, was implied from the motif from before. So the chord sounds like this, and that motif is easily resembled here. Now, the next transition section uses basically everything that we just talked about. It has the motif, it has a variation of that chromatic ascending line, it has a major 2. So it's nice to have a moment that kind of brings things together before, once again, blowing our minds. That's right, next up we have the part of the song that has this sort of dance between stars. And in this section, it's the first time that we see a progression start on a minor chord, that B minor. Now, what this does is sets up the song for a little mystery and kind of creates a sense of being lost. And I think this is a really important section because the song progresses like a story. There's the initial call to action with the intriguing orchestral tuning, the backstory where the protagonist explains coloratura and really gives some depth and solid tone to the story, the chorus which builds character and experience, and then we get to this section. This lost, mysterious sound is the point where things really change pace. The listener may have thought they knew where the song was going, but then these chimes come in and completely flip the script. But what makes this section so important is that when the chorus comes back in, it's so much more satisfying that we made it through this mystery. And this section, mixed with the reintroduction of the chorus, might be my favorite parts of the song, just because of how well it paints this space odyssey. But before we get into that last chorus, it does perhaps the most wild thing in this entire song. It goes to a swing section, and not only that, it goes to a swing section in 5/4. So if you're wondering what I mean by this, in a swing, the subdivision of the beat gets a little extra space and falls into this pocket. So in this section, instead of going like 1, 2, and 3, it goes 1, 2, and 3. And when I say 5/4, I mean that the time signature uses 5 beats instead of the typical 4. So it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just to make things even more interesting, they add a beat at the end of each of the 2 phrases. So it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, this section is absolutely insane and I love every bit of it. Then after this section, we go into this beautiful piano part that prolongs this major 3 chord. And I don't really have a lot to talk about this part other than the fact that it serves as the perfect transition back into this final chorus. And this romantic era Chopin style piano playing brings such an uplifting and encouraging tone that makes the final chorus feel just super strong. Now in the final chorus, it's basically the same as the previous chorus, but the instrumentation changes and it creates this more full sound. But the really cool part about this ending is the post-chorus section. It's very anthemic, and even when it winds down, it vamps on this 1 and 2 chord, prolonging this grandiose emotion. Now, even after this song is basically over, they have one final surprise for us. Right after this post-chorus, it plays this motif one last time, and then it goes to the C major chord. And this just creates such a rich sound that adds so much to the tone of the piece. And a really cool thing about this is that the root of the C major chord is the lowered 7th. So this is the third time we are seeing this lowered 7th play an important role in this piece. And the final thing I wanted to bring up was the name, coloratura. In music, it's a term that denotes a virtuous melody that is typically used when describing a difficult soprano line that has lots of leaps and runs. Now, I don't know if they intentionally chose this term for that reason, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless because this song really is diverse and has lots of leaps between sections. It's definitely not your typical 4-chord song that you can learn in like 5 minutes. It's a very beautiful piece with lots of unique, colorful moments. And that is everything that I wanted to bring up today about the music theory behind this masterpiece that is coloratura. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, again, I would encourage you to please subscribe. I really do love making these videos, but they do take a lot of time to make, so if you wouldn't mind showing a little support for my efforts, that would be greatly appreciated. Now, I look forward to diving into the rest of this album when it comes out in full, and of course, if you have any other song suggestions for me to dive into like I did today, please comment below. And as always, thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.